Chiaroscuro sphere is a good exercise for us to work on because it allows us to further practice continuous tone rendering, but also use value to create an illusionistic effect. Value is the most immediately gratifying element that we have in drawing, and so the Chiaroscuro sphere is just a very useful exercise early on learning how to use value. So this is an image of the sphere here. You can see the overall shape. Sphere is obviously a circle that we make seem three-dimensional and round by applying value patterns to it. So here we have our sphere. It's good to look up here is where our light source is coming from. We actually can, this circle is going to be illuminated. We can kind of imagine the light source. And what this does for us, if we kind of imagine these lines coming from the light source, kind of begin to see where the circle starts to turn away from the sphere. And that's kind of how our, right here and right here, where the roundness starts to move away from the sphere. That kind of starts our area of shadow. And so we draw these value patterns so that they're rounded, just like the sphere itself. And these value patterns actually become something of cross contour lines. They further inform the kind of roundness of the sphere. They make it seem more round if we keep them rounded. The Chiaroscuro sphere is roughly 2/3 light, and about a third of the area is in shadow. The shadow area down here has a central shape that's kind of a crescent moon shape that runs all the way up to the edges up here. And that's our core shadow here. And below this, we have the light comes down, it reflects off the surface of the table and back up into the sphere. And so then this bottom value bar here is what we call reflected light. So we have 6 stages of value in the Chiaroscuro sphere. We have highlight, which is this brightest moment right here. And that's the only area of absolute white in the sphere. This area right here is our area of light. And like I said, it takes up roughly 2/3 of the overall area of the sphere. So the largest value pattern that we have in our Chiaroscuro sphere. This area here is where shadow happens. This central darkest part of the core shadow, it starts at the same point up here, gets wider in the middle, and then thinner back up to the top. This is our core shadow. And then this down here is our area of reflected light. So we have highlight, light, shadow, core shadow, reflected light, and then the Chiaroscuro sphere, if we continued our lines from our light source here, we would see the areas where our cast shadow would be created. This actually might even extend further off the page. If we follow where that light would hit, would be kind of the end of it. But this is kind of our darkest value with our sphere. It's an elliptical shape, and if we drew the whole thing, we'd see that the sphere actually overlaps part of it. It's almost like the sphere is sitting in the middle of a puddle. But this is the cast shadow. So we have 6 stages of value: highlight, light, shadow, core shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow. And it's a conceptual model of how light from a single light source would fall across a round sphere. And we are in this case imagining our light source from this kind of top right position, and so the shadow is cast. The cast shadow extends off to the left of the sphere, and this is a map of how the value pattern of the sphere would happen in this kind of ideal circumstance of the light coming from right there. This requires a single light source. So the light source is very important. And this imagining a single light source, no other light involved. And again, the term for this is our chiaroscuro sphere. So this is the map, the general map that we imagine and sets up these very important vocabulary terms. And we can look for these value patterns in other forms and in more complicated forms. Even if there are multiple light sources, you might have multiple highlights and multiple cast shadows and multiple core shadows and multiple versions of reflected light. This scenario can get much more complicated in real life, but this is kind of the introductory form that we use to introduce those vocabulary terms and begin to be aware of how light falls across a three-dimensional form. So if we return to our exercise that we've been working on, we first completed these value bars, and we set up our format here just as a reminder. We measured up 12 inches on the page, so we have 12 inches there and 12 inches there, and we divided our page in half. In the lower half we did these value bars, and the value bars establish 6 stages of value, and that is not accidental because we have 6 stages of value included here. If we looked at our value bars and our value bar and we numbered it, we would see that if 1 was white and 6 was our darkest tone, our highlight would be a 1. The area of light would be a 2. The area of shadow would be a 3. The core shadow would be a 5. The reflected light would be a 4, and the cast shadow would be a 6. And so we can kind of correspond the value bar and the chiaroscuro sphere. So we want to be sure that we see 6 stages of value in the sphere. Again, we have to map out the sphere based on this notion. We imagine there's a light source up here at the top, and this light comes down from the light source and gives us our kind of indication of where our value patterns will start. And here we have our sphere we've drawn here. I'll darken it in a little bit for the sake of mapping in our drawing here. We have our sphere that we drew out, that you will draw out. Easiest way, the trick to drawing a circle, is to put your pencil down at a point and then just allow it to run around. And don't think about where it's going. Don't watch where it goes. Just kind of let it run around, and sometimes you have to do a few and then erase out things. You can see I kind of got a wobble that I put down right there. But as you're drawing, a lot of times you're kind of searching out a form. So we have our sphere shape here where the light, where the sphere starts to turn away from the light source. We get our area of shadow. Remembering that light takes up about 2/3 of the sphere. I think the suggestion for the size of that circle in this drawing is about 5 inches. And you can see this one, it's right about 5 inches in diameter, maybe 5.5. A little larger. Yours could even maybe be a little smaller than this. But again, the area of shadow needs to be round. It needs to reiterate the roundness of this form. Remember that these value patterns we're drawing in are essentially cross contour lines that help define the roundness of this form here. So we have our area of shadow. It starts with this line. This central kind of crooked smile or crescent moon shape that I'm drawing in here is the core shadow. And then the area down below that is the reflected light. Remember that there's light that kind of bounces up off the surface of this imaginary table and creates this area of reflected light down here. And then we have our cast shadow that's created where the sphere blocks the light source and leaves a cast shadow onto the table or wherever the sphere is sitting. It's whatever surface it's sitting on. We get this cast shadow that is where it's blocking out the light source. This cast shadow again should be an elliptical shape, almost like an oval but more rounded. And the sphere overlaps, it kind of sits in the middle of it like it is puddle, right? So we have a little highlight shape up here. The highlight should be right in the center of the area of light. That's where the light actually comes down and bounces directly back at our eye. The darkest value in the sphere is this area of core shadow. That core shadow should get thicker in the middle. It should be much more pronounced in the middle here, and then gets thinner into that kind of crescent moon shape up there. So once we've got our values mapped out here, then it's our job to go in and start to render the tones of these different areas. I like to start in the darkest area of the sphere, which is the core shadow, and I'll just start rendering in some tone, very similar to the value bars. I just want to start to get down some tones. We're just trying to saturate the paper. My pencil is getting a little short here, but I'm still holding it the same way as when I write. And I'm just, for me, it's the best way to go. The easiest way is to begin with the core shadow and really just try to get some value in there. For a lot of folks, they tend to want to make the darkest tone in the sphere lowest. That's not the case. Our darkest tone is actually kind of up in the middle of this area of shadow. The area below that, the reflected light, will lighten up just slightly. So I just try to really saturate this area with graphite. I might want to get the angle of the pencil a little more severe, really feed this stuff into the teeth of the paper. I don't like using this small pencil, but I'm running out of pencils, and I am just going to deal with it. But this core shadow goes all the way up to where the shadow starts, right here. And we just keep adding the graphite down, trying to vary the angle slightly. Sometimes I'll move around the page to try to get a different angle and get the graphite to grab onto different sides of the teeth. I may switch over to a bit of a more standard sized pencil. What I like to do, I use this area of shadow to kind of get a rhythm or kind of a feel for the pencil. And then I'll start to push the values out off of that area. Because eventually, even though we map these value patterns in a really hard, with hard lines, and that by the end of this drawing, we really want to not be able to tell where one starts or stops directly, but you just want them to transition into each other. So I get the core shadow down there, and then I'll just start rendering off of it. And sometimes I like to get the tip of the pencil and really work away some of those little white teeth of the paper shapes. If your circle is not perfect, it's something that you can adjust while you keep drawing. And this is a value study, so by the end of it, we don't want to an outline. We don't want a drawn line. We want the edge of the sphere to be created where the middle tone comes up against either the background or the cast shadow. So we're going to try to get rid of any outlines by the end of it. Those are just to kind of map in, so we kind of have a placement for where our different values should go. So that's our area of reflected light that would be below the cast shadow. But I'm going to work just the same way I did with the bars. I'm going to spend quite a bit of time trying to get the technique, get these values much more subtly applied. I'm just kind of roughing them in at this point. Let's see a little white tooth of the paper I want to knock back early on, but I'm also going to glaze again like I did last time with the yellow pencil, the HB pencil. But like I said, by the end of this, we don't want any hard line in between our values inside of the sphere. So you know, I will work diligently to try to get the values to kind of blend into the values that surround them. So the core shadow will not be a stripe of dark. It'll be the darkest band, but it will be fading into the values that are around it. Sometimes I do better than others at this kind of rendering off of the core shadow, and sometimes I need to go back in with a kneaded eraser and get more subtlety. Like I said, it shouldn't be a stripe. It should kind of fade out into the area around it. I got my area of shadow kind of roughed in at this point. I'm going to try to render off of that into the area of light. So this is our area of shadow that was right there. And now I'm trying to transition out into the area of light, which is going to be a much more of a light middle tone. And I will work to get both continuous tone and a lighter value. Probably, if experience has taught me, I'm going to wind up needing to make the area of light darker than it actually should be, and I'm going to have to use a kneaded eraser to go back and lighten it up to the appropriate value. But if I don't get it darker, then I won't have a continuous tone. I'll just have directional marks that show up. So I'll oftentimes wind up getting much darker than necessary in the area of light, knowing that I'm going to have to use the kneaded eraser to kind of even things out. That's just, for me, I cannot get the light middle tones without doing that additive and subtractive process. Even now it's looking a little way too rough. But that's okay, as long as I have an end in sight and I know that my kneaded eraser is gonna do what I need to do. So I'm okay to over render this area at this point, knowing that my kneaded eraser will fix it for me as I go along. I am trying to feather these marks, same way we did in the value bar. Trying to feather things so that I don't see the directional marks. My pencil may be getting dulled out a little bit. I'm probably going to switch over to a sharper pencil once I get these kind of initial values roughed in here. Whoop. That was way too dark. So transitioning between different values is a a big thing that we have to figure out how to be able to do. For me, it often involves this kind of what I'm calling over-rendering. But same way we did before, I'll take my kneaded eraser, kind of stretch it out, and I'll form it into a pad. And I'll just take it and I'll just start to pull off areas of this. You know, keeping the area of highlight white, and then just letting the lighter middle tones, what should be, you know, closer to what we see in our valley bar there, start to take over. But that notion of addition and subtraction are both part of this. Extremely important as we try to get a rendering really subtly blended. If I see areas that start to be kind of this looks dark, this looks dark, that looks dark, I'll make a point out of the eraser and I'll go into those areas specifically to try to lighten up areas where there just seems to be little shapes that are just significantly, notably darker than they should be. Maybe this area here. This all is an area of light. It's supposed to be a much lighter middle tone. And like I said, I rendered in way more tone than should have been there. And I knew I was going to do this. Take out a significant amount of that. I do want things to transition off the highlight. So we're starting to get a little more subtlety. I'm going to get a sharper pencil at this point. I'm going to go back and try to work in a little bit more. This area of the sphere up here is kind of rough, the outer edges of it. I want to try to fix some of that. Again, I know I'm going too dark, and I know I'm going to go back into it. But sometimes I will let the edges around here get a little darker because it gives them the look of kind of turning away from this. But not this dark. This is just trying to get the rendering technique where we don't see any of the pencil marks. That's the reason for darkening in this area and putting down more value. Just trying to minimize the directional lines we can see. And again, it takes time. It is about kind of repeated treatment of areas. The notion of addition and subtraction. You're kind of continually adding some and taking some away, trying to get the rendering to be really subtle, smooth, no marks of the pencil, and these transitions we shouldn't be able to tell where the area of shadow meets the area of light. They should just have difficulty because it transitions so slowly. We just can't even perceive where one thing stops and one starts. So, kind of continually just work over areas to try to make sure that the tones are smoothly applied. And really, I'm thinking what I need to do soon is use the HB, the yellow pencil, to start to kind of smooth some of this out where we see the texture of the paper. I am going to go back in with a kneaded eraser again because my values It seemed to got a little dark up there. So I'll start tapping out around this. There's quite a bit more area here. You'll see this thing getting filled up with graphite. You got to recharge it, make a new start there. And you can see how that darker tone really helps that kind of appear to round away up there. I don't guess we really want it that dark, so I will try to minimize that some, but it does have a certain illusionistic potential up there. We just want it to be more of a lighter middle tone. Working here. I guess in everyday life, the eraser really is for mistakes. That's not the case. In this rendering technique, the eraser is really an equal member of the team, and so we kind of have to begin to embrace that idea if we really want to become good at the continuous tone rendering technique. So like I said, I think I want to switch up and maybe start to use my HB pencil. I see little white teeth of the paper showing up in the core shadow area, and I'd like to use this to kind of feed the graphite into those little areas where it needs to darken up. And also start to get the general rendering to smooth out just a little bit where we have some of the texture of the paper, kind of giving it more of that kind of gloppy look. Now there may be times where if I'm smudging this with my hand slightly, you may want to put a piece of scrap paper down so that you don't smudge. And remember that all of our transitions and things in this, we don't ever use our finger to smudge. This is all done with the continuous tone technique. When you smudge, you do add some of the oil from your skin to the drawing. It actually tends to change the color of the graphite slightly and becomes very noticeable. It also makes the addition and subtraction that we often try to do nearly impossible. Once you get the oils mixed in, it seems to be more and more difficult to do subtractive rendering with the kneaded eraser. The oil just kind of sticks things down to the paper in a way that is counter to the continuous tone rendering process. I would say that I have got a very, very dark tone in the core shadow at this point, and potentially too dark. It really is kind of, as I feather out, it's really kind of taking over, and I probably need to use my kneaded eraser to reassert the value change that's associated with the area of reflected light. I'll smooth out the values first, though, using this sharp HB pencil to move the graphite around, but probably going to look to... I also, at this point, am going to, with the HB pencil, I do like to use it as a moment to kind of harden up some of the edges. With rendering, the sphere tends to get a little bit kind of hairy, where the little rendering edges kind of sneak off the sides of the page, and this is our opportunity sometimes to kind of reassert the smooth edge of the sphere while we're kind of moving the graphite around. And this, again, this technique is called glazing, and it really does a good job of smoothing out. This paper, this particular pad, seems to have maybe more texture than I like, and it leaves a lot of those little white dots. And the HB glazing technique tends to allow me to knock those down a little bit, make that less noticeable. And so again, I'll do the same thing up here. Trying to get the rendering to blend out off of there. I'm trying to get rid of some of the appearance of texture of the paper. Some little white dots in here. I continue to rotate the pencil as I draw, trying to allow the graphite to sharpen itself to some degree. Change the angle. Again, this technique is requiring me to repeat. Repetition is a big part. This is the third, or at least the third time I've gone over some of these areas. And it may seem like overkill to some, but to me, it's kind of assuring that I'm going to get really good, smooth, continuous tone technique by the end of this thing if I continue to kind of work and feather directional lines together and really get the value, the lighter middle tones, the darker tones. I really want them just to saturate all the teeth of the paper to give me my best effects. And I'm definitely going to be in need of using that kneaded eraser. This has all gotten very, very dark down here. And again, the dark is sneaking up into the area of light and highlight. And we'll need to pretty quick to take these things right down to lighter middle tones. But as you go, you might note on your drawing that you get uneven areas. I'm getting some uneven areas up here, and either I have to make all the area around it darker, or I have to take the kneaded eraser in to even things out and make it lighter. But it doesn't just happen. Even with a very, very good soft touch, you still wind up having to use the addition and subtraction as your best tool to get things to all really, really blend together. Change the angle. Constantly change the angle of your rendering. Sometimes I'll work very specifically into an area if I see a dark or a light patch or something that I want to blend out. So we got that pretty far. I'm starting to get a few smudges and things out here that I need to fix. And by the end of this, we can get rid of those initial lines we drew to indicate the light source. Gotta refresh this eraser. Tap out here. Again, we don't want a hard line around the highlight. We I don't want a giant highlight. So we got to get our lighter middle tone to see, that's really getting filled up with the graphite. Let's see, there it is. And we'll take it, stretch it out a few times, and it'll be light again. And we can do that again. Let me refresh it again. I'm going to work, the darker areas a little bit also. I definitely want the lighter middle tones to lighten up, and in some areas it looks like there's a little bit of an uneven quality. Getting some darker areas, I may take the eraser, try to even those out a little bit. I definitely need to work back into some of the areas. Our dark tones may well have pushed up a little too high, but I admit that I have a harder time with the lighter middle tones. The eraser is really my only way to get those. So I'm going to work back into the areas, the darker areas. Try to lighten up some of that. And sometimes these demos go better than others. This one is requiring a little bit more work and rework, but that's how the drawings go. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's modeling the drawing process, and so you have to work and rework areas to get the technique to really happen sometimes. So I'm trying to lighten up that area of shadow using this kneaded eraser. Taking back down some of these values. I don't want to lose that roundness. Sometimes the kneaded eraser is a good tool for going back in and getting some of the roundness of forms. I also need to go in and lighten up my area of reflected light a little bit. I want kind of a pad shape that will not leave too much evidence of being there. I don't want to leave new marks. I just want to barely pull off a little bit of value while I'm doing this. And should be subtle, and that's pretty strong. Doing this, you wind up having to go back and add some value back in. So let's see if we use our HB, if we can blend off that a little bit. Get the transition from core to reflected light. This thing probably needs to be sharpened. Do I have a sharper one? Yeah. Switch it out for a sharper one. Get some of this blending to occur. I'm not putting any much in the way of new value down, just trying to blend out what's there, smooth things out a little bit. Certainly don't want to bear down hard with the HB pencil because it will damage the paper pretty quickly. You gotta stay pretty light doing this. So we're getting a better transition there from a core shadow to a lighter tone, the number 4 area of reflected light. Try to get some of this blended out a little bit, working between the area of shadow and the area of light. Make it so dark again, I have to. I'm just going to go over it real softly, trying to get a middle tone that will just contrast slightly and head up towards the highlight, create a little bit of a difference. So the only area of absolute white is supposed to be in that highlight. Okay, so we're starting to get it. Probably the transition here is not exactly what I would want it to be. And we just really need some subtlety that's not all that there yet, but we're getting there slowly but slowly. I think what I'll do before I try to get these transitions just the way I want them is work into the area of the cast shadow. We haven't touched our cast shadow yet. One of the things that happens right now, this area looks dark, the area of reflected light, but once we start putting in the cast shadow, then it starts to appear much lighter. So the cast shadow is actually our darkest value in the sphere. We start working, and this is an area where we want the line, the bottom of the sphere is created where the dark tone of the cast shadow comes up against the middle tone of the reflected light. But it's really amazing how all of a sudden what appeared to be a really dark tone will seem much lighter when you put the dark tone of the cast shadow there underneath it. It really changes how that looks. And sometimes people get fooled and they think that area of reflected light is supposed to be a brighter middle tone. In fact, it's not. It's a very dark middle tone, but it just appears lighter because it's right between two very dark tones, the kind of core shadow of the sphere and the dark cast shadow. So it is interesting to see how the perception of that value shape changes pretty quickly once you get it surrounded by dark tones. Again, the cast shadow is probably our darkest value in the whole thing, at least the area right underneath the sphere. And but we don't want to, smash it into being and bear down on the paper really hard and damage the paper. We just want to sneak up on it. We're putting down a lot of graphite, lightly, trying to use a sharp pencil and vary the angles, but we don't want to damage the paper down there, even though we know that area is going to be very dark. Often use the term sneak up on your darkest darks. That's definitely what we're trying to do down here. That cast shadow is has our darkest values in it, but I don't often let the whole thing be just a flat number 6 or darkest tone value. I'll let it transition a little bit oftentimes. I will make it really dark by the sphere and then kind of lighten out as it goes away a little bit, just to give it a little value change. Anytime you can have value change, things seem more realistic. Anywhere you put a large flat area value, things tend to flatten out. So if you can find moments to make value changes occur, you get a much better illusionistic effect. But it really is interesting to note how bright that looks now, whereas it used to look very, very dark. Okay, let's get a little more. Let me see if I can find a sharp. This may be my final sharp pencil. I'm going to try to get these little white teeth of the paper everywhere here. And then I'll glaze this with the HB to finish this part off. The edge of the shadow should wind up being pretty soft. You know, it's not a hard line. Shadows don't have a real hard edge, so we wind up trying to blur that out. Now I'm messing up right there. Pencil's kind of running away. I need to trim that ellipse back down a little bit. So in this area where I want it to be its darkest, I'm going to try to feed that pencil down into the little teeth of the paper and make sure we cover that whole area. I may try to round up the sphere if I see it needs any corrections here. I'll try to feed the paper down into the teeth. You don't want the edge of the shadow to wind up being a little bit blurry. Change my angle a little bit. It really is great how this HB pencil can take that graphite that's already down there and move it around and smooth it out. And it stays sharp long because it is it's harder. It's just a harder graphite, so it'll stay sharp and do that. Really take advantage of the graphite you've already got placed with the softer, darker ebony pencil. But we are trying to do this all continuous tone, so we're trying to get rid of any evidence of the movement of the pencil, make it flat tone. It means we have to kind of work back over areas and really get them to smooth out and not appear to have been the product of the movement of the pencil. They're just continuous tones. Okay, we can probably get that even better. I definitely could work back into the middle tones of the sphere, but you get a good sense of it there. I kind of lost my dramatic highlight, but I think the technique and using it to create an illusion are both really important aspects of this particular exercise, and I look forward to seeing your renderings. I'm going to work on this one a little bit more, and I'll check back in on this video in just a minute, trying to get that drawing finished. Okay, so I've got the sphere rendering is a little further along and really kind of corresponds with the value patterns that we outline with the chiaroscuro sphere. You can see certainly it has the 6 stages of value from our value bar, and if we look at our map that we have started out with the 6 stages of value with the highlight, light, shadow, core shadow, reflected light, and cast shadow, we can certainly see that we have those 6 stages of value happening, and certainly a good illusion of roundness and light falling across the form. That's a chiaroscuro sphere, and I look forward to seeing your projects.